Welcome viewers. In this lecture, we will be discussing about the determinants of organizational structure. Specifically, I will discuss about the role of power and influence in the workplace. So here the learning objectives is what is definition of power, what are the bases of power. We will also discuss about the influence tactics and identify various bases of power and their role in organizational contingencies. We will discuss about the legitimate and illegitimate political behavior, identify the causes and consequences of the political behavior. To begin with, I will first speak about what is power. Power in organization, how does it influence organization's performance? Power is the capacity of a person, team or organization to influence other individuals. It is the potential to influence others, like people who are associated with the individual who is working with the manager. How many people are influenced by his behavior, his way of working. So, people have power they don't use and may not know that they possess. Power requires one person's perception of dependence on another individual or another person. So, we will also further discuss about how power helps in creating dependencies. Power is the capacity that a person A has to influence the behavior of another individual B, so that the person B acts according to the wishes of A. It exists as a potential or fully actualized influence over a dependent relationship. So, there is a dependence of B on A. So, there is a dependence of an employee on his or her supervisor. What is dependency? B's relationship to A when A possesses something that B requires. A person, like as for example, in this case, a subordinate would depend on his leader when he possesses knowledge, he has expertise, he has say authority. So, there is a kind of dependency relationship. The greater B's dependence, the more power A has, which means that higher the knowledge, expertise, experience, skills or power of an individual or authority the supervisor enjoys, there would be more dependence of his subordinates on him and he wields more power. So, talking about the concepts of power in organizations, how does it create a kind of relationship between supervisor and subordinate or in the team, and how does it impact organizational performance? We will discuss more concepts of power in organizations. In organizational theory, power is the ability to influence other individuals and achieve intended outcomes like achieving the organizational goals and objectives. A critical aspect of organizational dynamics and how it is intertwined with organizational structure and design, particularly regarding the authority, control, and decision making processes like centralization and decentralization. Power is also understood as a capacity to influence people, groups, decisions within an organization. If a person has power in terms of his authority related to the positions, so he can influence a group of individuals working with him, and as well as he can also play an important role in decision making. So, these concepts will become more clear if we understand what is the power dynamics in the organization. It is a broader concept than authority. Power is something which a person has even if he does not have authority or he is not having just the position power. Authority is considered as a formal right which an individual has because of the position he is enjoying. Organizational structure defines how tasks are divided and coordinated, and power dynamics significantly influence this structure. For example, flat structures empower employees with more decision making authority, thus distributing power more broadly. Power is also linked to organizational politics, the process by which people use influence and social network to achieve their goals. Politics can sometimes be viewed negatively. Leaders can leaders need a certain level of power to set directions and accomplish organizational goals effectively. So let us understand and compare and contrast leadership and power. Leadership focuses on achievement of goals. Leaders' primary objective is to attain goals or objectives. Leaders require goal compatibility with the followers. Leaders try to align the followers' interest with the organizational goals. They focus on exercise power to influence subordinates. The focus here is leadership style and relationship with followers. What type of leadership style the leaders follow, whether it is a coercive leadership style or transactional leadership style by influencing subordinates using exchange of rewards and punishment transactions, exchange of rewards, coercive power, punishment power. So, what is the style the leader has adopted? Sometimes leaders also adopt transformational leadership style by their idealized influence. They try to influence subordinates, they try to extract work from the subordinates. So, there are various ways through which a leader can exercise or wield power or influence subordinates. Now, let us understand what is power. Power is used as a means for achieving goals. It is just a way through which the supervisors try to obtain goals or objectives. Require followers dependency. So, there has to be a dependency relationship between the leader and the follower. Followers need to understand how the leader is exercising power, whether he has referent power, whether he has knowledge power, or he is having the position power. What is that which is influencing or attracting the subordinates towards the leader? This power is basically used to gain lateral and upward influence. There is power tactics for gaining compliance. What are the bases of power or the sources of power? Jeffrey Pfeffer and Gerald Salancik, among others, have been instrumental in conducting research on strategic contingency theory. Jeffrey Pfeffer and Gerald Salancik, among others, have been very instrumental in conducting research on strategic contingency theory. We will discuss in more details about the strategic contingency approach. Their findings indicate that a department rated as powerful may possess one or more of the characteristics. In some organizations, the 5 power sources overlap, and each provides a useful way to evaluate sources of horizontal power. So, what is the power? What are the sources of power and types of power? We will understand in more details. Broadly, there are two main categories of power. One is formal or organizational power. The second one is personal power, or which is the individual's unique characteristics and how individual is able to influence subordinates. So, going with the first one, that is formal organizational power, which is derived from the position or role within the organization. And the formal power comes from legitimate position or legitimate power based on the formal hierarchy and authority. It is it's a formal way of giving power to somebody or giving position. For the position power, reward power is ability to control and administer rewards, like giving a bonus, promotion, decision about recognition. All this is considered as a reward power. Coercive power is ability to punish others or the subordinates. Information power is a control over critical information, access to information. When somebody is in a position, somebody is holding a hierarchy or formal position in the organization, authority in the organization, he has access to information, he has access to the various information that is procured in the organization, the various like about the resources, about finance. So he or she wields more power. The position also bestows certain corrective actions, like ability to punish individuals if the person is not able to obey norms, procedures, rules which are there in the formal rules and procedures which are there in the organization. Individuals can also be having the ability to reward other individuals based on their performance, based on how much effort they have given towards attainment of goals and objectives. Further, we can also take the personal powers, how they are different from the formal or organizational power. Personal power stems from an individual's unique abilities, unique characteristics, and it is dependent on on their formal position. Individuals have expertise on a particular subject. They have expertise because of their experience, like individual specialized knowledge, skills, competencies, their expertise, their experience. All that helps in gaining an individual, or all that helps in gaining an individual expertise, which will wield them more power over other individuals. People look forward to learn from that individual. What is referent power? Derived Referent power is basically derived from the personal traits of the individual, based on which the person is able to command respect, admiration, and loyalty. So, generally, we have seen that individuals are respected because of, or regarded because of, their ability to speak effectively, their ability to, or because they have they contribute to the organizations despite being not being in the formal positions, because of their exemplary act, or because of their exemplary behavior, or some unique traits. Individuals possess referent power. They are admired by rest of the employees or other people. So individuals influence others because they are liked or respected. So information power is another way. Information about the future helps companies to cope with environmental uncertainties. If you have access to information, you are able to take decisions, like you can take decisions in uncertain situations. For example, environmental activist like Medha Patkar was once very influential because of her prime concern was protecting the river Narmada. So information about future helps companies to cope with environmental uncertainties. You can take up issues. Information and power is control over information flow based on legitimate power. What is information power? Information power is basically when somebody has access to information. Information and power, they go hand in hand. When a person has control over information flow based on the legitimate power, either when they are in position in some formal authority, so they have control over information. Relates to formal communication network. Common examples, common in centralized structures like in a wheel pattern of structure. For example, the superintendent in the the superintendent in the, for example, in case of schools, communicating with assistant superintendents is a classic example. Information power. Information about the future helps companies to cope uh, with uncertainties. Uh, un- uh, uh, Information power, information about future helps companies to cope with environmental uncertainties. There are several examples where if a person is having access to power, like the person is having control over information flow based on legitimate power, relates to formal communication network, common in centralized structures like in a wheel pattern, where there is a nodal authority. Most of the projects, like for example, in the project types, there is a central authority or a person who is at the center of the project, who is connected with other employees in the organization. They are all in some capacity they are working in the project. So, this the central or the nodal authority has access to information. He or she will be disseminating information with other individuals. So, there is a two-way communication. He procures information from other individuals who are connected in the project, at the same time giving information to rest of the members. So, generally what happens in the wheel type of communication network, the individuals remain connected with each other and they are able to accomplish the goals or objective goal of the project. So, in this case, if you are able to take care of the uncertainties which may arise, if there is some breakdown which is happening, there is some concern about uncertainties, environmental uncertainties. Say for example, there anybody who can give an information prior to the disruption in the project, this will help in taking corrective action. So, what we have discussed is, if the leader has access to information, more information can help in building power over subordinates or the team members who are working with him or her. So, what we have, how access to information helps in building power, control over information flow. If a person who is leader of the team, say for example, there are various schools in the district and there is a superintendent, the central authority who communicates with assistant superintendent or subordinates in the district. So, all of them report to him. They are sending information about the performance of all the schools in the district, and the superintendent is able to take corrective action. So, all of them, all the schools will be working very well. So, this is one of the classic examples of how information can help in building power. Coping with uncertainties. As those who know how to cope with organizational uncertainties, they gain power because they are able to prevent any unforeseen situations. They are also able to forecast what will happen in future, how things will take care in future. They will also absorb information. So, information is power because information about the future helps companies, help organizations, help various agencies to cope with uncertainties, environmental uncertainties like any untoward instance, like during COVID, there were many situations, many like unforeseen situations which we have never experienced earlier. So, as a result, if there are some wheel type of network or if there is access to information, people would be taking corrective action. Like for example, anybody who has access to information would be able to exercise more power. So, what are the bases of power? What are the sources of power? Legitimate power is agreement that people in certain roles can request certain behavior of others based on the job description and mutual agreement from those expected to abide by this authority. Legitimate power range from zone of indifference in high power distance culture. Sources of power can be reward, ability to control the allocation of rewards valued by others and to remove negative sanctions. It operates based on upward as well as downward. Coercive power is ability to apply punishment, exist upward as well as downwards. Peer pressure is a form of coercive power. Expert power is individuals or work units' capacity to influence others by possessing knowledge or skills that they value. Employees gain expert power over companies in knowledge economy. Basis of formal power is established by an individual's position in an organization. There are basically three bases of power. One is coercive power, reward power and legitimate power. A power base dependent on fear of negative results is called coercive power. Reward power is compliance achieved based on ability to distribute rewards that others view as valuable, and legitimate is the formal authority to control and use resources based on person's position in the formal hierarchy. Basis of personal power is expert power and referent power. Power that comes from individuals' unique characteristics. These are also very effective. Expert power is influence based on specialized knowledge, skills, ability of an individual. Referent power, influence based on possession by an individual of the desirable resources or personal traits. Now let us understand how is this mechanism working. If you have basis of power, and how do you influence other individuals? What we have discussed is power is basically how we influence other individuals, how one person is able to wield or exercise his influence over other individuals. So, this will happen in and vary in context of various contingency factors. It will differ from situation to situation. So, in this model, we will be discussing about how the sources of power, that means the legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power and referent power, how these bases of power will help an individual influence over other individuals, be it subordinate, be it assistant supervisors. In case of the example of schools, the superintendent of school is able to exercise power over other superintendents, assistant superintendents, how they are able to run effectively the schools in the district. So, in this case, we will discuss about the role of the contingencies of power, like role of contingent factors and how they help in exercising control over other individuals. So, contingencies can be substitutability, centrality, discretion and visibility. We will discuss in more details like how individuals influence over other individuals. First, let us understand what is influence. Influence is any behavior that attempts to alter another individual's attitude or behavior. When we say that power is helping one person enjoy or exercise his influence over other individuals, that means the supervisor is able to change the attitude and behavior of the other individuals. An individual applies various bases of power. It's a process through which people achieve organizational objectives. So, what we have discussed, influence or power or basis of power are exercised, but it will help in achievement of organizational objectives. A is able to exercise his influence over the other individual using his expertise or personal power, or he is able to use the formal power or authority. This will help in achievement of goals. He or she is changing the attitude and behavior of individual. Say suppose one individual was not working effectively, but because A is able to change his attitude, behavior, make him streamlined, make him very rule bound, so he is able to attain organizational goals. So, it operates this power can be, or influencing power can operate up and down and across organizational hierarchy. Top management can exercise control over the other individuals at different levels. It can be from top to down, or it can be bottom to up. It can also be horizontal. So, operates up and down and across the organizational hierarchy. So, in organizational hierarchy, this influence can be exercised in any level, of hierarchy. I will cite an example of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, CEO of Apple Computer and Pixar Animation Studios, is famous for his ability to influence people through his persuasiveness, in which he draws them to the reality distortion field. He is able to explain how he is able to come up with innovation, is able to show them what may happen in future. So, contingencies of influence tactics. There are soft tactics, generally more acceptable. There are different ways of influencing subordinates. Appropriate influence tactics depends on the organizational position, influencers, power base, cultural values and expectations, age of the cohort, and also gender differences. What is the type of influence? There are different types of influence: silent authority and assertiveness. What is silent authority? Following requests without overt influence based on legitimate power, role modeling, common in high power distance culture. There are cultures with high and low power distance. There is culture is something where people have shared values which influence other individuals. Power distance is where there is a distribution of power within the society. The distribution of power is very high. Common example would be where the seniors are respected, regarded. So, which the seniors have the ability to influence their juniors. So, there is a kind of it's a difference in power based on the difference based on hierarchy. Like in the organizational context, the top management will exercise, or there are different levels in the organization. There is a concept of senior and junior based on the levels they levels or positions of the managers. Assertiveness is actively applying legitimate and coercive power, using vocal authority and reminding, confronting, checking, and threatening. Assertiveness. They put their voice up front, actively applying legitimate and coercive power. So these are various ways of influencing subordinates. Exchange, coalition formation. These are another types of influence tactics. Exchange is promising or reminding of past benefit. Sometimes today you have received a reward. In future, if the behavior is to be repeated, then you have to recall what was the past behavior which has earned me some kind of reward. So, promising or reminding of the past benefits in exchange of compliance. If you follow these norms, if you abide by the norms, you will be rewarded. Negotiation is integral to the strategy of exchange. Networking relates to exchange information. If people establish networks, it relates to exchanging influence. There would be exchange of influencing subordinates if they have a good relationship, networks, which relates to exchanging influence. Coalition formation is another type of influence tactics. Groups form to gain more power than individuals alone. There are a group of people can exercise more power, can exercise influence over another individuals or group of individuals. Pool resources, power legitimizes the issue, power through social identity. So, when an individual is associated to a group, he or she will become more powerful because they gain identity or social identity or respect in regards of in that community. So these are various ways influencing a group of individuals using based on the coalition formation. Another way of influencing is upward appeal, which is appealing to higher authority, includes appealing to firm's goals, formal alliance, or perception of alliance with higher status persons. Some individuals try to gain power or influence another individuals because of their access to higher authorities. Somebody would say that I am closer to the people at the top, people who are wielding more power. So he or she is also able to influence a group of subordinates. People try to associate or give him regards because of his closeness to the higher authority. Appealing to firm's goal. If somebody has contributed towards organizational objectives, he is always held in high regards in the eyes of other individuals. Formal alliance or perception of alliance with higher status person. So, if an individual says that he or she is associated with somebody who is in a higher position, or somebody who has a higher stature in the organization, that individual also will have a higher regard. Ingratiation or impression management is another influence practice. Ingratiation is increasing similarity or liking or linking, increasing linking or similarity to target. If you are, say, flattering, helping, seeking advice, that is all ingratiation technique or to influence a group of people. Impression management, actively shaping our public images, way we dress, or through your resume. All these are various ways of impressing other individuals, and these are also certain ways of types of influence strategy. Persuasion is another influence strategy, using logics, using facts, data, emotional appeal to gain acceptance, or depending on persuader, message content, message medium, and audience. Information control, manipulating others, access to information, withholding, filtering, rearranging information, giving information in a very, very presentable and acceptable manner. All these are ways through which you can influence. What happens as a result of the influence tactics adopted by individuals? What is the consequence of influence tactics? There are certain hard influence tactics and soft influence tactics. Hard influence tactics have like silent authority, upward appeal, coalition formation, information control, and assertiveness. If these are certain tactics which are considered to be hard tactics, and soft tactics are persuasion, ingratiation, impression management, and exchange of rewards. Greater resistance if you have adopted hard influence tactics, like you are silent authority, you are using exercise your power, you are using upward appeal or coalition formation, there is likely chance of resistance. And if you have a softer influence tactics, there would be more commitment, like say for example persuasion. You are appealing somebody using your persuasive appeal, then there is more likely commitment from individuals whom you are trying to influence. The moderate way is compliance. So power tactics is basically way in which an individual translates power basis into specific actions. There are 9 influence tactics. One is legitimacy, rational persuasion, inspirational appeal, consultation, by consulting with individuals using exchange power, or personal appeals, ingratiation, pressure, and coalition building. So, most effective ones are rational persuasion, where you are giving logic, you are giving data to support why you have given a particular strategy or adopted a particular strategy to obtain objective or goal. Inspirational appeal is also one of the most influential tactics, and consultation is also an influential tactics. Preferred power tactics by influence direction. There are upward influence, downward influence, and lateral influence. Rational persuasion is basically rational or logical way of persuading somebody is an upward influence tactics. Downward influence tactics is rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, pressure using exercising control or wielding pressure, consultation, ingratiation, exchange, and legitimacy. Then there is lateral influence, which comes through rational persuasion, consultation, ingratiation, exchange, legitimacy, personal appeal, and coalitions. Factors which are influencing power tactics. Choice and effectiveness of influence tactics are moderated by sequencing of tactics. That means softer to harder tactics work best. That means first we need to adopt a soft influence tactics, and finally we need to take up a harder tactics which will work best rather than doing it otherwise. Political skill of the user. If the person who is exercising these influence tactics is able to politically manipulate situations or using political skills, then the situation will be under his control, he will be able to wield more power. The culture of the organization also plays an important role. Culture affects users' choice of tactics. If the organizational culture is highly ethical, obeys norms, obeying the rules, regulations, then there would be the culture would disregard use of influence tactics, use of politics. There would be equanimity, the people would be very simple in their approach rather than being political. So, further we will discuss about strategic contingency approach. What is contingency? What are the contingency factors? Effective organizational design is contingent on factors like environment, strategy, technology, and size of the organization. So, what we have learned, there are various factors like environment, strategy, technology, organizational size have always played an important role in organizational performance. The alignment of the structure of these variables facilitates goal achievement. If the strategy, structure, technology, and the size is aligned with the structure, then the organization would be most effective. Strategic contingency approach to power is also similar to the resource dependence model. The organizations try to reduce dependency on external environment. This approach states that departments responsible for dealing with key resource issues and dependencies in the environment will become most powerful. Strategic contingency approach to power discusses about the events and activities inside and outside an organization are very essential for attaining goals or objectives. Departments which are involved with the strategic contingencies tend to have greater power. Departmental activities are very important when they provide value to solve problems or they are able to deal with the crisis in the situation. For example, if an organization is facing threat from the lawsuits, regulations, environmental issues, there is a project, there is a power project, or there is a residential complex, or there is a housing complex which has come up, and all these cases there is some legal issue. They have violated the environmental norms. There are certain violations to the environmental norms or pollution control norms. So, in that case, the legal department exercises more power. Legal department will gain power and influence over the other organizational decisions. Similarly, in case of a product innovation, the key strategic issue, that is the power of R&D, can be expected to be very high, because for innovation it's the research and development which comes up with new ideas. Apple's next innovation is because of the continuous effort of research and development cell, how they are designing the product, how they are coming up with a product which is unique to the market. All this helps in gaining, the R&D gains more or wields more power and than the other departments. It talks about the strategic contingency approach to gaining power. How power in organizational design plays an important role. Organizational design involves management decisions. There are decisions that shape the structure, and power is a central consideration in deciding the centralization or decentralization. The design decisions concern where the decision making power is concentrated, where the power lies, whether with the top management or with different levels of hierarchy. Mostly in centralized organizations, top management makes most decisions and lower level employees carry out just the orders or simply carry out the orders. In decentralized organizations, decision making is pushed down to the managers and employees closer to action, often leading to employee empowerment. Horizontal power dynamics exist across different departments. That means with the R&D, with marketing, finance, and every department like sales. So, departments that control critical resources, or they have access to critical resources, like they are coming designing products, doing research and development, they are selling the product in the market, packaging. So, departments that control critical resource cope with significant uncertainties, because the department which is developing a new product is mostly succumb to highest level of uncertainty or are irreplaceable, often gain more power. The departments which are dealing with the core product, or they are able to they are dealing with high uncertainties or which do not have any replacement, they gain or exercise more power. So, horizontal power relationship in organizations change as the strategic contingencies change. Horizontal power relationship in organizations keep on changing as as strategic contingencies change. So, which means that as the strategic choice or the organization strategies keep changing, the power relationship, power dynamics also keeps changing. Dealing with health crisis, for example, the communication department might gain power by soothing public fears, keeping people informed about the health department's efforts in overcoming the crisis. During COVID-19, the most influential department was the communication department, which came up with the news regarding how to deal with the virus or how to deal with the disease when the entire healthcare was in crisis. So, the communication strategies of every healthcare organization was very important. People were influenced by what strategy is being adopted by the healthcare sector in order to combat the health crisis of COVID-19. In the late 1990s, the World Bank, which provided developing countries with developmental financing, faced major criticism from civil society activists who said that many of the projects it supported made things worse for poor people in developing countries. The bank was put into crisis until its external relations department came forward for effective campaign to improve image of the organization. Thus, our communication department gains power by helping the organization like World Bank to present a positive side of the story. Departments that help organizations cope up with the new strategic issues will always gain a greater power than the other departments. So, based on these discussions, we have come forward with a kind of a model which is called the strategic contingencies and how they influence the horizontal power among departments. The power which is exercised by all the departments, the strategic constituencies have influenced the horizontal power. What are these contingencies factors? These factors are dependency, financial resources, centrality, non substitutability, and coping with uncertainty. How they influence horizontal power among departments. Dependency, the key to power. The general dependency postulate. When you are depending on somebody, the person on whom we are depending is exercising more power. The general dependency postulate. The greater B's dependency on A, the greater the power A has over B. Possession or control of scarce resources in organizations. Others' need make a manager powerful. Access to optional resources like multiple suppliers are there, it reduces the resource holder's power. When there are multiple suppliers, when there are substitutes available, so there will be less power exercised by the resource holder. Dependency increases when resources are important, resources are scarce, and resources are non-substitutable. For example, during COVID-19, the resources were scarce, the hospitals were very important, and hospitals' dependency on pharmaceutical companies because there were scarcity or dependency on oxygen cylinders. There were also like non-substitutable products were also there. So, then the dependency increases when resources are very rare and scarce. So, let us talk about interdepartmental dependency. Dependency is key element underlying relative power which is derived from someone else wants like material, information, resources may flow between departments in one direction such as the case of sequential task interdependence. The department receiving resource in a lower position than the department providing them. When 7 or 8 departments are there, they must come forward to help the engineering department. For example, engineering is a stronger power position in contrast to the department to a department that depends on many other departments is in a low position. When 7 or 8 departments must come for help to the engineering department, for example, engineering is always in a strong position. In contrast, a department that depends on many other departments is in a lower position. Likewise, in a department in an otherwise low power position might gain power through dependencies. If a factory cannot produce without the expertise of maintenance workers to keep the machines working, the maintenance department is in a strong power position because it has control over a strategic contingency. Financial resources, control over resources is an important source of power in organizations. Money can be converted into other kinds of resources that are needed by other departments. Money generates dependency. Departments that provide financial resource have something other departments want. Departments that generate income for an organization have greater power. Sales as the most powerful unit in most industrial firms. This is because salespeople find customers and bring in money, thereby removing an important problem for the organization. An ability to provide financial resource also explains why certain departments are powerful in organizations such as universities. Centrality reflects a department's role in the primary activity of an organization. It is the extent to which work of the department affects the final output of the organization. For example, production department is central to for example, production department is more central and usually has more power than the staff groups. Assuming no other critical contingencies are there, centrality is associated with power because it reflects the contribution made to the organization. The corporate finance department of an investment bank generally has more power than the stock research department. By contrast, in manufacturing firms, finance tends to be in a lower power position when the finance department has limited task of recording money and expenditures. It is not responsible for obtaining critical resources, not for producing the products of the organization. Today, however, finance has greater power in many organizations because of the greater need to control cost. Non substitutability. Power is determined by non substitutability, which means a department's function cannot be performed by other readily available resources. Like I said, during health crisis or pharma industry being supplier to a healthcare organization, so there is no substitute for it. The healthcare, every hospital is dependent on pharmaceutical industry. There is no readily available resource. So pharma is non substitutable resource. If an employee cannot be easily replaced, like his or her power is always greater. Today we talk about the changing or shift in industries, the nature of industry or the industrial revolution, industry 4.0 and 5.0, where there is a need for readily available manpower. There is a need for uh, people who have knowledge on artificial intelligence and machine learning, those who have who have knowledge of data mining, data scientists. They are somebody who have high skills or they have knowledge over various softwares for data manipulation, data interpretation. So if an employee cannot be easily replaced, we need skilled manpower to take up the jobs in industry 4.0 and 5.0. So in that case, those employees exercise greater power. If an organization has no alternative sources of skill and information, a department's power will be greater. For example, consultants, analysts might be used as substitutes for staff people to reduce the power of staff group. The impact of substitutability on power was studied for programs in computer department. When computers were first introduced, programming was a rare and specialized occupation. Programmers controlled the use of organizational computers because they alone possessed the knowledge to program them. Over a period of about 10 years, computer programming has become a very common activity and people could be substituted easily, and the power of programming departments have reduced or dropped. Although the power of computer network planners grew as companies began depending more and more on complex IT systems. Increasing non substitutability depends on differentiation, controlling tasks, controlling knowledge, and controlling labor. How do we cope with uncertainty? The strategic is another strategic constituency that influence horizontal power. How does an organization cope with uncertainty? Elements in the environment can change swiftly and can be unpredictable and complex. In the face of uncertainty, little information is available to managers on appropriate course of action. Departments reduce this uncertainty for the organization and increase their power. When market research personnel accurately predict change in the demand for new products, they gain power and prestige because they have reduced a critical uncertainty. In future, what would be the demand of the new industry? What would be the demand of consumers? What is the trend? If if the market research personnel are able to predict using artificial intelligence and machine learning mechanisms, if they are able to correctly predict what is the future of the market, so they wield more power. But forecasting is only one technique. Sometimes uncertainty can be reduced by taking quick and appropriate action after an unpredictable event has happened. Networking and power. Cultivating social relationship with others to accomplish one's goals increases power through social capital. If you have a large follower group, or if you are able to connect with various individuals, if you have established a rapport with people, that means you are increasing your power through establishing social capital, durable networks that connect. There are a group of people who are always looking forward to your association, to you for some decisions. So social capital network is a durable network that connects people to others and valuable resources. Referent power, people tend to identify more with partners within their own network. Visibility and centrality contingencies. To summarize, today we have discussed about concept of power in organizations, the sources of power. We have discussed about the two categories of power, like formal and personal power. Then we have discussed in details about information power, the sources of power, various sources of power like legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expertise, and then further we discussed about the model of power in organizations, where the basis of power and how individuals take the basis of power as a reference to influence over others, and the role of contingencies of power, like the various contingencies like substitutability, centrality, discretion, visibility, and how they help in influencing individuals. We have also discussed about different types of influence tactics. So, this will basically what we have discussed, how power plays an important role in influencing people to attain organizational objectives. Thank you.